we have to just finish up a little piece on Ayin Vav Amud Beis. And we're up to Miyad. So let's just review where we're holding now. David HaMelech is volunteering to go out and kill and face in battle Goliath. And at that point, Shaul turns to Avner and he asks him, Mi zeh hanar. And Avner says, I don't know him. So the Gemara asks the question, what do you mean? Already in an earlier chapter, the Tanakh records that Shaul had a special love for David because David was playing the kinnor to get the king out of depression. The Gemara says, no. What was Shaul asking? He was asking about the father of David, Ben Mi Zehana. And then once again, the Gemara proved that certainly Shaul knew exactly who was the father of David because Yishai was one of the great officers in the king's court. He was a sar for Shishim Ribui. But the Gemara says now that what Shaul was inquiring about was whether or not David was a descendant of Peretz or of Zerach. And if he was a descendant of Peretz, then he's really Osid Lios Melech, because Peretz is Poretz Gedoros Lasos Lam Derech. And then the Gemara explains that Shaul already suspected that David might become the king because at one point Shaul had put his clothing onto David and David fit into his clothing miraculously, even though Shaul was so tall, etc., etc. Okay, now comes onto the stage Doeg Hadomi, apparently quite a Talmud Chacham, and he says to Shaul, before you ask whether or not David is royal of Malchus, whether he's from Peretz or so forth, why don't you ask if he's royal level of Kol, because he came from Rus HaMoaviyah. So Avner turns to Doeg and he says, wait a minute, we have a drasha, Amoni v'lo Mamonis, Moavi v'lo Moavis. So now Doeg asks Avner, Elamiata mamzer v'lo mamzeres. And the Gemara offers an answer. Then he asks him, Mitzri v'lo mitzris. Should we exclude the nekevus of mitzris? And the Gemara answers that the reason why in the case of Bnei Ammon, we differentiate between the females and the males is because the Torah gives us the reason why Ammoni should not come into Klal Yisrael, and that is Shelo Kidmu Eschem Belechem Ubemayim. And the Gemara goes on to argue that it's Darko Shel Ish Lekadem Belechem Ubemayim and not Darko Shel Ish. Then Doeg raises the following objection: the women should have gone out for the women folk of Israel, and therefore we should exclude the women of Ammon and Moab. And at that point, Avner was shosek, he didn't know how to answer it. So we got up to the word miyad. So let's see if we can find that. It should be about 3 lines up from the bottom. Let me just find it. Miyad. So it's 2.5 lines up before the end of Ayin Vav Amud Beis. Miyad, immediately when Shaul hears the words of Doeg, he sends Avner to ask in the Beis Medrash, what is the status of the offspring of a Moaviyah? Vayomer HaMelech Sha'al Ata ben Mizeh ha'elem. And there's a change in the language here. Originally, he had asked Mizeh ben Anar. Now it's a Helen. Hasam karile nar v'hacha karile elem. And the Gemara explains that the word elem here has a deeper meaning. Hachi karmale halacha nis alma mimcha. That you don't really know, it's concealed. What is the status of a Moaviyah? Tzeu sha'al b'beis hamedrash. Shal. And Avner shows up the base medrash. Amrule, they say Amoni v'lo Amonis, Moavi lo Moavis. Therefore, David is mutter lova l'kol. And now we turn to the daf for today. Ayin Zayin. Actually, Doeg kol ani kushasam v'ishtik. They couldn't answer Doeg's question. Boy lach ruze ale. So they wanted to now announce publicly that David cannot come into call. And miyad, immediately someone by the name of Yisra prevents them from making this pronouncement. And the Gemara explains that we're going to derive this from a drasha. It says in Sefer Shmuel, Va'amasa ben ish, ushmo Yisra Yisraeli, asher ba el Avigail bas Nachash. So Yisra is called Yisra HaYisraeli. Uksiv, elsewhere in Divrei Yomim, it says Avigail Yoldas Amasa Vavi Amasa Yeser HaYishmaeli. So who is this Yeser or Yisra? Is he Yisra Yisraeli or is he Yisra Yishmaeli? And the Gemara says, Amar Rava, to reconcile this contradiction, Malami Chagar Charbo Ki Yishmael. He was really Yisraeli, but he tied his sword around himself like a Yishmaeli, like Arafat, in front of the United Nations. The Omer declared, Kol Mishani Eno Shomei Halacha Zu. Anyone who doesn't accept this halacha, Yidaker Becheret. He should be cut by the sword. Kach Mekublani Mi Beis Dino Shel Shmuel HaRamasi, Amoni V'lo Moavi V'lo Moavis. The Gemara asks, can we trust Yisra? But Omar Rabbi Abba, Omar Rav, we have a principle called Talmid Chacham Shemora Halacha. Uba, it means he comes with a new halacha that we never heard until now. Im Kode Maisa Mora, if the question had not arisen and he gave this transmission, we accepted him lav. But if he only makes this statement after the question becomes relevant, when it's on the table, ain't shomila. We can't accept the dvar chidur, something brand new, because we're afraid that maybe he's lying, and he's only giving this halachic ruling because of the question that's on the table. So how could Yisra be Neman? How could we rely on Yisra when he quotes this halacha that he gave this hora after the question was asked already about the status of David? Shani Hasam Daha Shmuel Beis Dino Kayam. We have a principle called Milsa Davidi Ligluya, that a person is believed on something that will find out one way or the other down the line whether he's lying. A person would not want to be caught on a lie, so he must be telling the truth. And here too, if Yisra is saying something in the name of the Beis Din of Shmuel, then Beis Din of Shmuel is still up and running, it's active. We'll find out whether he's telling the truth or not telling the truth. So therefore we can rely on it. Mikal Makom, says the Gemara, Kasha, how can you accept this drasha of Moavi v'lo Moavis? Doeg asked the Kasha by Mitzri, it says Mitzri, so we should say Mitzris is not included and she should be Muteres. Ella, what are you going to tell me? Because Lo Kidmu Eschem Belechem Maim doesn't apply to the women, but yet Hayalem Lekadem Nashim Lekras Nashim. My answer is Hacha Targimu in Bavel. They gave the following answer: that when we say Lo Roy Lekadem Lechem Umayim, even for the sake of other women, because the pasuk says in Tehillim, Kol Kvuda Bas Melech Pnima, that the covenant of a woman is to remain in her house, and it's not her derech to go out in the public. And therefore, the women folk of Ammon were not expected to go out publicly, even for the sake of serving food and water to the women of Israel. But my Rava Amri, In Eretz Yisrael, they gave it a little bit of a different twist. Item Rabbi Yitzchak. Others say it was Rabbi Yitzchak who said this. Omar Kra, when the Malachim came to visit Avram, Vayomu Elav Vayesar Ishtecha, where is your wife? And Avram responded, Hine ba'oel. So it means Ein Darka Shel Isha Lotzeis Mi Beisa. She's in the oel. And therefore, getting back to Ammon, the women were not expected to go out of their homes likras nashim. The Gemara says Kitanoi. We have a machlokes tanoim and a brisa about how we derive the conclusion that a Moavis is allowed to enter into Klal Yisrael, obviously after Geras. Ammon, Ammoni v'lo Ammonis, Moavi v'lo Moavis, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, we derive it from the fact that the pasuk is written in Lashon Zachar, and the Lashon Zachar comes to exclude the women folk. And Rabbi Shimon Omer al dvar asher lo kidmu eschem belechem mayim dakel shel ish lekad vein dakel shel ish lekad, even lekrat anoch. So here Tosfos raised the problem. Divrei Maskel Kitanoi. How is Rabbi Yehuda going to answer the kuchos of Doeg? Because if you're going to derive the conclusion that Moavi is in Zachar to the exclusion of Moavis, we'll make the same diuk with regard to the Mitzri. They'll say that Mitzri v'lo Mitzris. Tosfos has a complicated answer over here because of a diuk in the pasuk. In any event, Dorash Rava. Now we have a little bit of an agadic excursion here. My dichsiv, what does David HaMelech mean when he says, Ani avdecha ben Masechet pitachto lemoseroi? You have loosened the ritzuos shekoshim behemes ha'ol. Omar David l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rebbeinu shel olam, shnei moseros shehayu alai pitachtem. There are two moseros that are, so to speak, in weighing me down or holding me back, and you loosen those moseros, those straps. What are the two moseros? Rus HaMoaviyah. After all, I am a descendant of Rus. Nama Hamonis. Right? There's a woman who was married to Shlomo by the name of Nama, and she came from the nation of Ammon, and she was the mother of Rechavam ben Shlomo. And Malchi Beis David will come from the seed of Rechavam. So, if the Nikevos of Ammon and Moab were prohibited to the Kol, then both David and Rechavam would be excluded from Klal Yisrael because they came from, respectively, Moab and Ammon. So Dorash Rava. So it must be, therefore, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Poteach Mosaros, and he was matir both Rechavam and David to come into Kol, which means Ammonis and Moavis. Furthermore, Darshans Rava, my ditzim pasuk in Tilim. Rabosa sisa to Hashem Elokai. Niflo secha machshvo secha elenu. What does it mean, a lot? In the Lashon Yachid. So it doesn't say a lie, it says elenu. In Lashon Rabbi. So a lie b'Lashon Yachid lo nemar. Ela elenu b'Lashon Rabbi. Malamid Rechavam, who's the grandson of David. Yoshev b'cheiko shel David. So David was sort of raising Rechavam, his grandson. Omar lo, David says to him, Alai v'alecha nemu shtei mikros halol. There are two psukim that were darshaned in order to be matir, you and I, level a kol. Ammoni v'lo Ammoni, Ammoni v'lo Ammonis, and Moavi v'lo Moavis. That's Elenu, the Lashon Rabin. Dorash Rava, another Josh of Rava. My Pasiva Pasuk in Tilim. David Amel declares Hazamarti Hine Basi Megillah Sefer Kosav Alai. There's some sort of Megillah Sefer, which is usually a reference to Torah, and it's written about me. Omar David Ani Amarti, when I was appointed and anointed as king, Atobasi. Now I came to Gedula. I never entertained the idea that maybe way before I was anointed as king, I was already, it was already, shall we say, predicted that I would be Ola Gedula. For Lo Yadati, and I didn't know Shabbat Megillah Sefer in the Torah itself, Kosovo, the fact that I would become the leader of Israel, the king of Israel, was already written in the Megillah Sefer. And what this is referring to is that already at the time of Avraham Avinu, there was a Megillah Sefer, there was a Torah that was written about David. And how do we know this? Hasam Ksiv. When the Malachim were rushing Lot out of stone because Hashem was destroying stone, it says, "Vayaitzu hamalachim v'Lot le'makum kach es ishtecha v'shtei benosecha ha-nimtzaos." And the word nimtzaot in a slightly different conjugation appears in Tehillim. Hachaksiv, this is the pasuk that we quoted earlier, matzasi, again the word matzasi like nimtzos, matzasi David avdi v'shemen kodshi mishachtiv. So from the word matzasi David, we know that the nimtzos is a reference to David. And yet, we're talking about the Benos Lot. So it must be a remez here that Mitzias David Amel Sheba Mehem. Already at the time of Avraham Avinu, it was alluded to in the Torah that David would become the king. Omar Ulam Rabbi Yochanan, it starts a brand new sugya. We have to recite a special Shir Malas here that we should survive this sugya. It's one of these sugyas of drushes, but in and out and back and forth. One letter here and one very. Plus, you have to keep in mind who's marrying who. Omar Ulam Rabbi Yochanan. Bas Ger Amoni Sheira Lekuhuna. Just 1 second. Sorry. Just give me 1 second, Rabbi Rhodes. Okay, So now we have a statement of Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan regarding a Bas Ger Ammoni. Okay, now she was born to a Ger Ammoni. But here's the big question. Her father was a Ger Ammoni. Who was her mother? And this girl, who's a Bas Ger Ammoni, is Ksheira L'Kahuna, according to Rabbi Yochanan. So let's divide up the sugya that we're about to learn into what I call Roman numeral number 1 and Roman numeral number 2. So I'm gonna ask the following question. This Ger Ammoni, her father, who was he married to? Was he married to an Ammonis who was a Giores? So that you have two parents, a father and a mother, who both were Ammonim by birth, both underwent Gerus, and then they married each other. After they, so right, so let's call it T1, T2, T3. T1, they underwent Gerus. T2, they married each other, and T3, they had a daughter. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that the mother of this daughter that we're talking about, in other words, the wife of the Ammoni Ger, was a Bas Yisrael, right? A regular Jewish girl. The only problem is that then the marriage is illegitimate. So right now, Roman numeral number 1, we're going to assume that the marriage was legitimate and that the Ammoni married an Ammonis. And if they were both Gerim, that's fine. So the girl who was born to this marriage is what we call Hora'asa V'Leidasa B'Kedusha. She was conceived and born in Kedusha because there was no issue in this marriage. And the Gemara is going to try to spend a lot of time figuring out what the Chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan is. We would have said that this Bas is Muteres L'Kol, but not necessarily the Kahuna. And this depends on a Gemara in Kedushin Daf Ayin Zayin. And that's the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi about the daughter of a chalal, whether the daughter of a chalal, meaning her father's a chalal, could marry a Kohen. Rabbi Yehuda holds no. Let me backtrack again. The daughter of a chalal is certainly, beyond question, is disqualified for kahuna. That's explicit in the Torah. We're going to now learn a machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi about not the daughter of a chalal, but rather the daughter of a ger. In other words, her father's a ger. And Rabbi Yehuda was machmir, and he equates the daughter of a ger to the daughter of a chalal. And just like the daughter of a chalal is a chalal and she's excluded from kahuna, so too the daughter of a ger is psula l'kahuna. Rabbi Yossi disagrees, and according to Rabbi Yossi, bas ger ksheira l'kahuna. The daughter of a ger can marry a kohen, and she's not to be equated with the daughter of a chalal. It's almost as if to say that chalalus is part of the DNA. You know, it goes down genetically to the next generation. So the bas chalal is a chalal, but a bas ger is ksheira l'kahuna. I mean, she doesn't have any psul l'kahuna. Amalei Rava bar Ula le'ula. Kiman. According to which opinion in this machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi is Rabbi Yochanan formulating his din? Ki Rabbi Yehuda I cannot reconcile Rabbi Yochanan with Rabbi Yehuda. Ha'amar Rabbi Yehuda, bas ger zachar, if this girl's father was a ger, and even if he was married to a bas Yisrael, kibas chol zachar. So a bas ger is psula l'kuhuna, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And that would apply to any ger, certainly to the ger Ammoni. So the daughter of a ger Ammoni, according to Rabbi Yehuda, would certainly be psula l'kuna, disqualified for kuna, and therefore we cannot reconcile Rabbi Yochanan with Rabbi Yehuda. Ve'i ke Rabbi Yossi, but if it's according to Rabbi Yossi, who was machshir a bas ger l'kuhuna, pshita. What is Rabbi Yochanan adding to Rabbi Yossi? Just as it said halacha Rabbi Yossi. Ha'omar Rabbi Yossi is explicit in the Mishnah in Kedushin that not only if a ger marries a bas Yisrael, but even if a ger marries a giores, so you have a ger and a giores, two parents, and they have a daughter, ito ksheru l'kuhuna. So we see explicitly that Rabbi Yossi maintains that the bas gerim, even if both parents are gerim, can marry a kohen. But keep in mind that Rabbi Yochanan was not talking about stam, a regular case of bas gerim, where both the father and the daughter were, and the mother were gerim. He's talking about a bas ger Ammoni. And if you'll answer, what's the chiddush Rabbi Yochanan above and beyond Rabbi Yossi is bahanach dera'uyim lava b'kol. Maybe the statement and the position of Rabbi Yossi only applies to the bas ger when her father is a ger haroi lava b'kol, like all the nations on the earth. Aval hai, but the ger of an Ammoni comes from that nation of Ammon. That's what Rabbi Yochanan wants to be mechadish. The ein roy love of a call, right? We're not going to allow this ger to marry a Jewish woman. It's not like the case of a ger from any other nation who could marry a Jewish woman. Okay, we've been him of kahuda, but as far as love of a call. So therefore, the Gemara is now working overtime. And this is going to take us a long time to sort this all out, to try to understand the Havamina before Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to go with the Shita Rabbi Yossi that a bas ger is ksher l'kuhuna, and that applies even if both her father and her mother are gerim. And we're going to try to figure out why there would be a Havamina to say that if her parent was a ger Ammoni, then the law would change. So the Gemara asked me, Nolet, why would it have crossed the mind of Rabbi Yochanan, or for that matter, our minds, that we can make this distinction? And we would think, again, if not for Rabbi Yochanan, to distinguish between Rabbi Yossi's case of a bas ger mishar ha'umos, where Rabbi Yossi maintains that the bas is ksher l'kuna, as opposed to a bas ger Ammoni who is not roy l'kol, and his daughter, therefore, before Rabbi Yochanan should be psula l'kuna, and the answer is the yolef mikoin gadol balmona. Rabbi Yochanan thought, again, in the Havamina, that let's derive from the case of kohen gadol who marries an almona. And of course, the almana is asura olav. The bas is psula l'kuhuna. And I would have said that just like the daughter of an almana l'kohen gadol is excluded from kuna, so too the daughter of a ger Ammoni is also psula l'kuhuna because of the pagam of the iser kol of the ger, of the Ammoni. The Gemara rejects this outright. What are you talking about? You can't learn anything from Kohen Gadol. Malak Kohen Gadol Balmona Shekem Yasab Avera. The reason why the daughter that's born to a marriage between the Kohen Gadol and an Almana is Psula L'Kuhuna, and she has the status of a Chalola, that's because she was generated by a Bias Avera. A Kohen Gadol is not allowed to have a relationship, and certainly not a marriage relationship, with an almana. So as a result of the Maisa Vera, that's what generates the psul of chalolos. But we're talking about a case in the Roman numeral number 1 that we're learning now of a ger amoni who marries a gioris amonis, and that's heter. There's no Maisa Vera. There's no reason to passel the bas to kahuna. And the Gemara answers, Cholol Yochiach. What's the case of a Cholol? A Cholol who's excluded from kahuna marries a Bas Yisrael. There's no Avera at all. But because there's a psul in the father, namely the Cholol, that psul is carried on to the children. So we have nothing to do here with Bias Avera. But we're talking rather about Pagama Ovid. That's all that we have over here in the case of a Cholol who marries a Bas Yisrael. And yet the daughter is Psula Lakun. So too, we would have thought that a Bas Ger Amoni, even though there's no Avera in his marriage to a Gioras Amonis, the Bas should be Psula because her father has a Pagam. And just like the father, in the case of a Bas Cholol, the father has a Pagam, and therefore the daughter is Psula Lakuna. So too, in the case of a daughter of an Amoni, there's also Pagam of it. And that should passel the daughter. You see, you don't need Biyasa Bavir. So the Gemara rejects this. You can't derive anything from Bas Cholol to Bas Ger Amoni. Malachol sheken yitzirasa bavera. There's something genetic over here. From the moment that the daughter was born and she came into this, backtrack on that. From the moment that this cholol, the father of the daughter, came into existence, it was yitzirasa bavera. Who is a cholol? A chol is a case of, for example, of a grusha that's married to a kohen. The child is a chol. So this chol was yitzirasa bavera, and that's a pagam that passels the child of the chol, even when there was no avera in his marriage. So the bas is psul kahuna. But in the case of ger amoni, there's no yitzirasa bavera here. In ger amoni, there was no avera at all. Not like in the case of chol, was created through an avera. So the Gemara answers, but Kohen Gadol yochia. Right? In the case of a Kohen Gadol who marries an almana, there's no yitzirasa bavera over here. No one is yitzirasa bavera. She's an almana. He's a Kohen Gadol. There's no yitzir bavera. And yet, nevertheless, the child is possible. Ella, what you're going to tell me? The child is possible because of biaso ba'aver. She came from a bias iser, and I'm going to quote the case of a chol. A bas chol did not come through any aver. The chol was allowed to marry bas Yisrael. You'll slug me up and you'll say I can't derive anything from the bas chol because that's yitzirasa ba'avera. Then I'll quote you the case of Almana L'Kohen Gadol. So now we have a tzad shava. She'ena barov kol and bito psula. Afkan here too in the case of Bnei Ammoni. She'en rov eno barov kol psula. So we have a tzad shava, and based on this tzad shava, we would certainly conclude. And again, this is the Havamina of Rabbi Yochanan, that in the case of a ger amoni with a pagam, which is called Eino Barov Kol, which is the same as Eino Barov Yisrael, these are also level of Kol, is therefore Bito Psula. So the Eino Barov Kol of Kohen Gadol or of Cholol, right? What's the Eino Barov Kol, the Pagam of the Almana Kohen Gadol? That's a Pagam of the Aver itself, the Bias Avera. And in the case of a Cholol, the Pagam is that he came through an Aver. And here also there's a Pagam because an Ammoni, even though he's a Ger, he's excluded from Kol. That's a Pagam. And that should generate a psul in the bas. Now the Gemara rejects this tzad hashavah. Mal tzad hashavah shebahem shekein yesh behem tzad avera. You cannot equate a ger armoni with the cases of almana l'kohen gadol or chala, because in those two cases we're talking about yesh behem tzad avera. The bia of an almana l'kohen gadol from which the bas was created was ba'avera, and in the case of bas cholol, she was created by her father, and her father was created by an avera. But in bas amoni, there's no avera, not yitzirasa, not yitziras avia, and therefore it's pshita that she's ksheira l'kahuna. So what again is the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan? So now the Gemara takes a different approach. This is what I call Roman numeral number 2, to understand the statement and the ruling of Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Dilma, perhaps what Rabbi Yochanan was talking about was Vadai. So it's like, I'm not sure about the Girsa here. Yeah, the Bach takes out the word Vadai. Dilma ba'moni shenasa bas Yisrael kam. Whoa. Rabbi Yochanan was saying a much more sensational chiddush. He was talking about an Ammoni who married a bas Yisrael, not an Ammonis. And an Ammoni, even though he's a ger, is enjoined from marrying a bas Yisrael. So there's a biol avera. Afal gav de biyosab avera, bito kshera. And this is a radical chiddush. Again, we're basing ourselves on Rabbi Yossi again against Rabbi Yehuda. But even the case of Rabbi Yossi was bas ger. There was no avera over here, the bas ger. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi held it was ksher lakuna. Now we're going a major step forward. In a case of an avera, biyasa ba'avera, in an Ammoni who married a bas Yisrael, the vlad is kosher lakuna, the bas. That's not something that we saw in Rabbi Yossi, at least not explicitly. Amalei, so Ula turns to Rav and he says, you're right. The second understanding of Rabbi Yochanan is the correct one. Why? When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael and he quoted Rabbi Yochanan, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Bas Ger Ammoni, and here we have to add a few words, Shenasa Bas Yisrael, so the Ger Ammoni illegitimately, illegally married a Bas Yisrael, and the daughter that was created from that marriage, and likewise, Ubas Mitzri Sheni. Again, we're talking about a Mitzri Sheni Shenasa Bas Yisrael illegally. So the Biyasam in both these cases is Biyasam Bavera, and nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan Omar Ksheira Lakun of Reish Lakish Am Psula. He points out here in the note that the chiddush here of Rabbi Yochanan is that she's allowed to marry a Kohen. L'Yisrael ksheira l'kuli alma mishum sha'monis u'mitzri shlishi mutarim lava b'kol. Right, the daughter of this second generation Mitzri is certainly mutar b'kol. She's already a shlishi. And there's no such thing as a psul chalolis to Yisrael. So a bas ger Ammoni, about whom Rabbi Yochanan said ksheira, must mean ksheira l'kuhuna. I mean, Yisrael, certainly she's ksher. We don't need Rabbi Yochanan for that. The Gemara now explains the machlok shin Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish am psula the yolef la mi kohen gadol balmana. And whenever there's biyasam ba'avera, then the child that's born is psula lekahuna, like in the case of kohen gadol balmana, and now in the case of a bas ger amoni shenasa bas Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kshera. Now the Gemara has to analyze Rabbi Yochanan's position of Kshera.